Okay, everybody, let me welcome you to our one and only lecture in the series of We Ran Out of Time series. We have studied the Renaissance a little bit in class, but I'd rather spend the rest of class time, the short of time we have, reviewing for the exam. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this video online and then the PowerPoint online, because I know it's backwards, but I'm not going to fix that because I'm a history person, not a tech person, so you just live with it. But you will be able to see the PowerPoint online. So we're going to go back a little bit and talk about the beginnings of the Renaissance. We've done that in class, but then we're going to move on, and we're going to finish talking about government and then education and then art in the Renaissance, okay? So let's get started. All right, so as we mentioned before in class, Italy was a special case in the Middle Ages. Italy was not Italy. It wasn't a country yet. It was not even a kingdom that had a king of Italy. It was actually divided into different states, and here's a picture of these states. And so each of these is a city-state ruled by a different type of government. And the government, they were free to choose their governments because they were so independent. And so they chose a type of government that worked for them. Now, one of the things we talked about last time that I want to bring up again is the idea that Italy was a very wealthy area because it was the place where Asian goods came in to Europe and then eventually out into continental Europe proper. And so the Italian city-states were able to charge pretty much whatever they wanted for Asian goods, which made the merchants of Italy very wealthy. And that idea of wealth, remember, it's the way we measure power in the modern age is through money, not through land. And so they're the ones that began that trend, right? Now, we want to pay particular attention to one city-state here, and that is the Republic of Florence, okay? That is, and again, it's not the biggest. We have the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, and then Rome is much larger land-wise, but that doesn't matter anymore, remember, because we're talking about money, and Florence was definitely the richest of all the city-states. Okay. Now, Renaissance. Let's review. Renaissance means rebirth, and so the next question you ask is rebirth of what? And it is a rebirth of the classical age. And we're talking about ancient history, and we talk about classical. We mean Greece and Rome. The word classic simply just means something that is old, but is still in style. Like I always use the term, the example of blue jeans. Blue jeans are old, but people still wear blue jeans today. But in this case, classical simply means Greece and Rome. So the cultures of Greece and Rome, education of Greece and Rome, art of Greece and Rome makes its way back to Italy. But the question is, where did it go? Well, a lot of it, especially the education and learning, was censored or banned by the Catholic Church. A lot of the philosophers did not jive with Roman Catholicism, and we know heresy is a big crime in Europe during the Middle Ages, and so a lot of those were banned. In the the west of Europe, in Roman Catholic Western Europe. In the east, they survived in the Byzantine Empire, right? Because the Byzantine Empire was, for the most part, Greek. And therefore, a lot of those Greek writers and Greek philosophers also survived. They also survived, surprisingly enough, in many places in the Muslim world. Before the Muslims became really conservative, there was a flowering of culture and learning during this period of time. We've talked about the houses of wisdom in Baghdad and Cordoba, and a lot of those translation centers, a lot of times they were translating Plato, they were translating Aristotle, and things like that. That would eventually make its way to Europe, right? Well, one of the things that really kind of started the Renaissance. So we've got one ingredient here, which is wealthy city-states that are independent from each other. So they have money and they have freedom. And then we have the emergence or the influx of Greek ideas. Now, why do these Greek ideas all of a sudden come from the east to the west? And the answer to that is 1453. In 1453, Constantinople falls to the Turks, right? We talked about the Crusades. We talked about how the Turks were the ones in the Middle East that the Crusaders were supposed to be fighting, according to the Byzantines. Eventually, those Turks would rise up and they would conquer the Byzantine Empire. So 1453 is a bad date for the Byzantines because the Byzantine Empire disappears. Constantinople becomes, you say it with me, Istanbul, right? But all those Greek ideas, they leave Constantinople. They flee west to Christian Europe, right? And so they make their way into Italy. And so there's this huge influx of Greek ideas, Greek thought, Greek art that makes its way into the city-states of Italy after 1453. Okay? See, ideas that come in Italian city-states from the East created. Yeah, there we are. All right, now. Okay, so let's start with the characteristics of the Renaissance. So what changed? And again, what we need to understand here is this is an evolution. This is a gradual change. It is not an overnight change. As a professor in graduate school once told me, it's not that peasants were working in a farm in Italy and looked up into the sky and said, oh, look, it's the Renaissance. No, that's not how it happened. For the average person, for the poor especially, nothing really changed. It was still a feudal system, and they still worked their land, and they lived, and they died. It was the same. But for the wealthier people, for the people who were at the top, for the people who could afford education, who could afford learning, it did change somewhat. And eventually this would begin an intellectual movement that begins at the end of this year and will follow us into next year, which will include things like the Protestant Reformation, the Scientific Revolution, the Enlightenment, eventually the American Revolution, can all be tied back to the Renaissance and the changes that began in the Renaissance. So, 3 areas that we're going to focus on. We're going to focus on government, we're going to focus on education, and we're going to focus on art. Now, in government, we have 3 different types that we'll look at. We're going to look at despotism, oligarchy, and military dictatorship. In education, we're going to introduce you to an idea known as humanism. And with art, we're going to talk about the revival of art in the classical form of the human body, as well as new ideas in painting and in drawing. So let's start with government. Since the city-states of Italy were independent, they each chose a form of government that best fit them. Mostly we're talking about economics, right? What is best for our city-state? What's going to make our city-state the wealthiest? What's going to make us have the most merchants with the most money? Yeah, and so it benefited everyone. It's not a selfish king saying, I'm going to take all this money and I'm going to spend it on my wars, like King John of England, right? It was more a beneficial thing that all wanted to benefit from. A strong city has the most wealthy citizens, right? So, first type of government that we see in the Renaissance, we're going to talk about an oligarchy. Now, when you look at oligarchy, you have to think about a board of directors, right, of a company. So imagine this city-state as a company, and imagine you have your wealthiest citizens on a council, and this council is going to make decisions for the city-state, going to pass laws for the city-state, and these laws and these decisions are going to make the city-state wealthy. It's for the benefit of the city-state. And so it's good, and it's a very modern model that we see today in corporations, and that's how the city-state was run. So this is probably one that we can really kind of relate to since it is so modern, right? Another one is a military dictatorship, and this one is a little more complicated, but I think it's very funny. One of the things that we discover in the Italian city-states of the Renaissance is that they did not allow their citizens to have weapons. They did not have citizen armies. One of the reasons is rebellion, of course. The idea that if you allow your citizens to have weapons, then they don't like you, they'll rebel against you and take over the city-state. One way to prevent that is to keep them from owning weapons. But the problem is this. If you're not going to have weapons, how do you fight a war? Well, conveniently, in Italy during that period of time, there were groups of mercenaries. And these groups of mercenaries were known as condottieri. Now, you know the reason I like this, right? Because it's got all these Italian words that I love to pronounce. Yes? Condottieri were the mercenary groups that were led by a general, and the general was named Podesta. Now, they would hire themselves out to city-states who were at war with each other. And so you would hire this Podesta, and they would hire this Podesta, and this condottieri, and that condottieri, and they would meet together and fight. Okay, so let me put it this way. You had to pay them to fight for you. The longer the war, the more they got paid. So if you think about it long enough, and you put yourself in the shoes of the Podesta, you can make yourself wealthy if you make the war longer, right? And so we actually see in certain cases where different condottieri got together that were supposed to be enemies, and they secretly made this plan to have a battle, and they said, okay, I'll put my cannons over here, and I'll shoot over your head, and you put your cannons over, you shoot over my head. We'll ride around and smack our swords together, and then we'll go back to our city-state and say, oh, it was a draw, you have to pay us more money. And so they would do that. It's kind of like the professional wrestling of warfare, right? They would stage it all out. No one would really die. There would be no winner, and they would go back to their city-state and say, oh, we need more money. Eventually, sometimes, the city-state would go bankrupt trying to pay these condottieri. If the city-state did go bankrupt, the option the condottieri had was just to take over the government of the city, which is what the Podesta would do. The Podesta would become the leader of the city, the army would become the police force, and they would take over the city-state. Right? So you had to be very careful as a city who you would hire. You had to be able to trust them. So, examples, right? Here is the prosperous city, maybe run by an oligarchy, right? This is a very famous fresco that we see on the walls of a community public building in one of the city-states. We have all these buildings and everybody milling around. Look at the PowerPoint closely, right? You've got people doing business, people happy, all joyous and things, because it's a very well-run city-state, right? Take a look at it in detail when you look at the PowerPoint. Here we have an example of a podesta. This is his nickname is the honey-eyed cat, is what they called him. He was a sneaky guy. And so he did what we described. He eventually bankrupted the city-state and then took over that city-state as its leader, right? So the example of a podesta. Okay, the most important system of government that we need to talk about is the idea of despotism. And I think we might have mentioned this and just introduced it to the class in our notes. And so despotism is a city-state that is run by one powerful leader or one powerful family. Okay, so what we discussed was how this is not like a king, because a king runs everything too. So maybe he's a king. Well, he's not, and the family is not a royal family. And here's why: the most famous of these families was the Medici family of Florence. Remember, I told you we need to keep our eye on Florence as the city-state, and so they had a despotic government run by a family known as the Medicis. The two most famous rulers of this family and the rulers of Florence were going to be Cosimo and his descendant Lorenzo. Right? And they're going to rule Florence for a number of years, right? Generation and generation. And they're going to make Florence the wealthiest city-state in Italy. Okay? So unlike kings, despots cannot claim their title from birth, right? As we talked about in class. A king is put in the womb of the queen mother by God. He is birthed and then becomes king because God chose him to be there. Not a despot. I think that the father of Cosimo was a tanner. Which was a very poor job. And Cosimo raised himself up from his bootstraps, a very American thing, right? And became a banker, eventually became what we would call today a venture capitalist, where he was loaning money to countries, loaning money to kings with interest, right? And getting tons of money back. Eventually the Medicis became the wealthiest family in Europe. Richer than kings, richer than popes. They were rich, right? And they used that wealth as status. But they cannot claim rule by birth, right? Because they're not. They're not royalty. So how do they prove the fact that they are royal? How do they prove the fact that they can rule? Well, first of all, the people have to like them. Kings aren't worried about people liking them, but the Medicis were. And so they had to benefit the city-state. They had to make sure their citizens were taken care of. So much like an elected official, and there was no election, but much like an elected official, they had to keep the people happy. So they spent a lot of time doing that. Another thing they did to try to legitimize their rule is to look like kings. They had lots of money, so they bought lots of wealthy things. They lived in a big palace, and the big thing they did was hire artists of the Renaissance to come and make sculptures and paintings that they would put in their palace and around Florence in order to show how wealthy the city-state is. Now, this is going to be the beginning of art in the Renaissance, and what we call this is patronage. Patronage is a common word. We still use it today. But it simply means that a person who supports the arts, right? They are a patron of the arts. They pay the artist to create art and let him live and feed him and things like that. So the Medici patronage is what caused a lot of the Renaissance art to begin, right? And we'll talk about that when we get to the art. So they had to look rich. That was a big part of it. So here we are. We have the Medicis. We have Cosimo, and we have his descendant Lorenzo, and they will run the Florence as a city-state. Very powerful people. But again, a family ruling Italy. And it sounds a little familiar, right? The family, la familia. Okay. So one of the things that they used to help rule, because again, this was brand new territory as far as in Western Europe at least, is the idea of how do we do it? What is the political way? What is the best way? And we talked about this in class. Remember, we talked about the idea of whether it's better to be feared as the leader of a city-state or loved as the leader of a city-state. Here is the book that we talked about. The Prince, written by Niccolo Machiavelli, one of the earliest political science books in Western Europe. Again, if you take a political science class in college, you will most likely have to read this book. It's not very long, but it is the beginning of how someone other than a king would run a country or a city-state, right? Okay, so education. Humanism. Okay, so before, what was education? Well, the best way to describe education in the Middle Ages during this period of time was the church's education, right? Books were preserved and copied in monasteries, schools were run by the church, universities were run by the church, and so everything had to be approved by the church. So if you went to school, you learned law, you learned religion, you learned science according to Aristotle, and that was approved, all approved and sanctioned by the church, right? And here's one thing you didn't learn. You didn't learn about people. because you didn't learn sociology, you didn't learn those types of sciences, because remember, the church considered people to be sinful, and the earth was sinful. And therefore, we shouldn't focus or spend our time studying people or the earth, because, as St. Augustine said, they will all die and pass away. And so you should spend more of your time studying religion and God. So there wasn't an emphasis on studying people or studying sociology or any type of those biology or things like that that involve people. No, it's just gross. And so, but in the Renaissance, with the rediscovery of like different Greek philosophers, Socrates, Plato, and other engineers, mathematicians, doctors of the Roman and Greek period, Renaissance educators began to study those again and really be inspired by their thoughts, right? So instead of studying the world from the perspective of the church, humanism focused more on people and their place in the universe, right? How do we fit into the universe? Before, we didn't care because we were sinful. Now we elevate people a little bit more and say people were created by God, and God in Genesis says that it was very good, so maybe we are more important than we've been led to believe, right? Maybe we are actually God's greatest creation, and therefore we should discover us and our world and how we fit in it, right? So the man who is most famous for teaching this philosophy in the Renaissance was Francesco Petrarca, or we know him today as Petrarch. He's considered to be the father of humanism and the founder of modern history. So you can say you're welcome for taking this class, because Petrarch is the guy who set us on this road to study history the way we study it today, right? And so one example of the way Petrarch would look at the world in philosophy is his book, A Letter to the Ancients. And so Letters to the Ancients is him writing letters to old philosophers like Plato and Socrates and other philosophers, Aristotle. And so he writes to them, and then in their voice, he writes back. Of course, they're dead. They can't write him. And so he writes back to himself. And it's like, we really love this theory of forms. And it's, but what about this? And so there's a debate. There's a running debate that he has with him and the ancient philosopher in his voice. And here's what this shows. It sounds a little schizophrenic, but here's what it shows. It shows if Aristotle was mentioned in the Middle Ages, no one said, and Aristotle believes this, but I believe this. Aristotle was just right. You didn't question Aristotle, right? But Petrarch does. And Petrarch questions the ideas of Socrates, and Petrarch questions the ideas of Plato, and there's a big debate in the book, with Petrarch talking to himself, but he's showing people that we respect these philosophers. We don't think they're infallible. We think that they have made mistakes, and we can improve on their ideas. And so that type of, for lack of a better word, arrogance is really what drove education in the Renaissance. The idea that we could make this better. We could take this idea and we can change it and make it a better idea, even though Socrates, the great Socrates, came up with it, it can still be wrong, right? Okay, so humanism developed into a new curriculum known as the humanities. So here we go. This is the payoff as how it relates to us, right? Today in school, we study sciences, but we also study humanities, right? And so if I say chemistry to you, you would say science. If I say geometry, you would say math/science. If I say history, humanities. English, language, humanities. Psychology, humanities, right? The study of the mind and how it works. And so we have a brand new curriculum, and we've added so much workload to your schedule by just adding humanities. And this is an idea that came about in the Renaissance and continues in modern education today, right? The humanities. If you go to a liberal arts college, it focuses on the humanities, rather than a technical college that will focus on the sciences and the maths. Okay? You're welcome, by the way. All right. So here we have Petrarch. He every picture I saw of him on the internet, he's wearing this leaves around his head, the laurel wreath, right? Okay, Petrarch. So he was an odd guy anyway. Teachers are odd. All right. So moving on. There we go. Art. Okay, this is my favorite. Now. And this is the one we know the most. I mean, when you talk about the Renaissance, you talk about art. You talk about the artists of the Renaissance, and so we'll get through this as fast as I can. I will try not to indulge. No promises. All right, so the rebirth of classical art saw a rediscovery of the human form. Now, think back. We talked about this in Greece, the idea of the human form and how the Greeks focused on, idealized, worshipped the human form, right? That disappears in the Middle Ages, and it's easy to see. I mean, the Pope's not going to agree with having a bunch of naked statues in a church, right? You got to clothe them, and you don't look at their bodies and how perfect it is because man is sinful. We're not worried about that. And so art in the Middle Ages becomes a lot more symbolic and less realistic until the Renaissance, when we reawake those things. I'm going to show you some slides in a second. You're going to be, wow, there's definitely continuity between the art of the classical period in Greece and the art of the Renaissance. It's really striking, yes? But so they reawoke this idea of the human form, but they also discovered new things. One of the things we don't see a lot in Greece is painting and drawing, right? We have a lot of sculpture and we have a lot of relief and things like that, but in the Renaissance we have painting. Right? We have painting because they introduced a new type of paint called oils that, like, the colors are more vibrant and you can make silks look like silks and skin looks like skin. But the artists saw the world in a different way as well. One of the things we can say about the intelligence of artists is they see the world in a very distinct way, right? And one of the things the artists discovered about looking at the world is that there is perspective. Yes, the world is in 3D, and I know I'm not saying anything that you don't know, but the world is three-dimensional. So how can we create a painting on a canvas to make it look three-dimensional? So they created what we know as perspective, right? So we have two types that we see in the Renaissance. We have linear perspective and we have atmospheric perspective. We're going to look at both of those. Now, if anyone's taken a sketch class or drawing class, you're going to see these slides and it's going to be, oh, yeah, I've done that, right? But this was created or rediscovered in the Renaissance. So you actually see some Roman frescoes with some pretty good perspective. But it's rediscovered in the Renaissance and used by artists to create a 3D image on a 2D surface, right? Okay, so many famous artists worked as inventors and scientists and poets. So we're not just artists here. The goal of a man during the Renaissance, and this relates back to education as well, is to be good at everything, right? Now, if you're sitting down, I'm going to give you some heavy knowledge here. In the Renaissance, no one ever said, why are we learning this? We're never going to use this. No, no, no. Because knowledge was there to learn. And the more you knew, the better you were. And so you learned for the sake of learning. Don't fall down. It's okay. Let me say it again, slow. You learned for the sake of learning. Not because you're going to use it in your life, not because it's going to be very significant to you, because it was there to learn and you wanted to stick it in your brain. That's why you learned it. I know it's crazy. But if you look at the greatest artists of the Renaissance, they were also scientists, they were doctors, they were poets, they were warriors. They did everything. Now, what do you call a man like that in the Renaissance? You call him a Renaissance man. And that is a Renaissance man. Someone who is good at everything. And the most famous artists, that I'm going to say these names, and you'll know them because they're household names, were Renaissance men. They were good at art, but they were good at so many other things. Renaissance man. Okay, here we go. Contrapposto. So in Greece, we call it the S-curve. That's when we're looking at classical Greece, we say, oh, S-curve, right, yes? In Renaissance, they give it a new name, against the post, or contrapposto, right? And so we have examples here of art that we have seen, right? All except the one on the right. And we're about to see that. You're probably familiar with it anyway. Early Greece, right? The Kouros, which is archaic style. Very stiff, remember, like Egypt. Then we have the middle one, which is the Critias boy, which is that transitional figure from archaic to classical. But we see the S-curve here. See that line that is drawn here? That looks very subtly like an S, right? And so we take all the weight on one foot. This foot is bent, or this leg is bent. And so now we have a natural look. Not a stiff, unnatural look, but a natural look. Now let's skip ahead to the Renaissance. David by Michelangelo, exactly the same thing. See the rediscovery there. We've lost it during the Middle Ages. We discovered it again in the Renaissance, right? Okay, so linear perspective. Okay, this is going to ring a few memories here for you. Maybe good, maybe bad, but the idea of the railroad tracks going off into the distance with the telephone poles and stuff. This is a typical Drawing 101 assignment, right? But it is significant because it shows what the Renaissance artists rediscovered with the idea of linear perspective. Items in the distance are smaller and reach a certain point, and items closer are bigger. Now, I'm showing you one-point perspective, which is really the only perspective that was used in the Renaissance. If you were in this Drawing 101 class, you probably also did two-point perspective. We're going to stick to one for our purposes because that's what the Renaissance artists would use, okay? Now, linear perspective. Okay, I got it. But what about atmospheric perspective? Well, hold on. You ever climbed a mountain and you get to the top and there are ridges of other mountains in the distance and you're just looking over those mountains and you notice that the mountains closer to you are darker and the mountains further away are lighter and lighter until eventually they just kind of blend in with the sky and you can't tell whether that's a cloud or a mountain? Atmospheric perspective. Now, that's what the artists noticed. The artists noticed that if you looked far away, things looked lighter. And if you looked closer, things were more, green or brown or whatever was close to you, and they were darker. And so what the artist would do is he would paint a landscape of nature, and in the back he would take a very thin film of white, and he would just go over the back of the painting and lighten all that up. You can still see the mountains in the background, but they were much wider than the ones in the foreground. And it made it look like they were way in the distance, miles and miles away, right? And that's atmospheric perspective. Again, the artist's eye saw these things and added them to the art. Atmospheric perspective. Okay, so let's begin. I'll give you some names of some famous artists and the work they did, and we'll talk about them. Donatello. We're kind of moving in chronological order here. We're trying anyway, right? Okay, so Donatello was an early sculptor hired by the de Medicis. They were patrons, right? And invited to Florence to create these beautiful statues, right? This is a bronze, and it is David. Now, not the Michelangelo David, okay? The Donatello David. And in this David, right, we see him as a youth. He was supposed to be a youth when he killed Goliath, and this is what's happening. He's killing Goliath. He's a nude, which is very classical and very Greek. He has the contrapposto, where his leg is bent and his leg is straight, right? And he has the huge sword, and he's standing on Goliath's head. Again, take a close look at it when you look at the PowerPoint, so you can see all the details. Now, he's wearing a kind of a Renaissance style, like, war helmet, and so there's a little modernization with this as well. But this is something that would probably be in the palace of the Medicis, maybe in their courtyard or something. And there's one thing that tells us about Lorenzo. Lorenzo loved classical art with biblical themes. And many times he would mix those. He would mix the classical with the biblical. And so you have a Greek statue of David, and Goliath. So that's what he liked to do. So Donatello worked for the first turtle, we're going to talk about, worked for the de Medicis. All right, now another one, Botticelli, didn't make the cut as a turtle, but still a great artist. But we're going to look at a couple of paintings of Botticelli. Now, Botticelli would come and paint for the de Medicis, right? And this one I like because it has a couple of things that we need to talk about. This is called the Adoration of the Magi. The Magi are wise men. So let me ask you a question. How many wise men were there? I'll give you a hint. Okay, now, it's a little more than 3 people in this painting here. Yes, there's actually a crowd of people in this painting. We have the Virgin Mary and the baby Jesus and Joseph back there, and that's supposed to be there. But who the heck are all these people? Well, the patrons, the Medici, turned Adoration of the Magi into a family portrait. So what we're looking at is all of the brothers and all of the cousins and all of the men of the Medici family painted at the manger. They just all got in a time machine, went back to Bethlehem, and they said hi to baby Jesus, and then came back, right? And they painted him while they were there. And so you have Cosimo, who's there at the baby's feet, and just tickling the baby's feet. And I think Lorenzo, I would say maybe is there. I'm not really sure which one Lorenzo is. But there are a lot of cousins and brothers and uncles and things in this painting. And it was just a family portrait, right? And that was patronage. Patronage wanted you at the scene. If that's what the patron wanted, that's what the artist painted. Now, another thing the artist would do during this period of time is they would paint themselves in the painting. So you could see, not just sign it, but see their image. And here's what we have here. Botticelli in the brown, looking at us. Usually the artist is the one looking right at us. And we can say, that's Botticelli. So we even know what Botticelli looks like as he paints himself in the painting. All right? Now, another thing that we see here is look at the pillars on this side. Look at the PowerPoint. You get a closer look. And you see these columns. One, we're probably not in Bethlehem at all. It looks like we're in Rome, right? So now the baby's been moved to Rome, and it's more convenient for the mention, And so, but you see that they kind of go and get smaller as we go back, and then the roof also angles in here and here. Hey, that's linear perspective. We're moving things back into space, right? And so we're seeing that the vanishing point is probably somewhere above Joseph's head here, or maybe even above Mary's head. As you follow the lines all the way back, probably somewhere above Mary's head, right? And so we have a little perspective in there as well. Okay, so Botticelli's first painting, Adoration of Magi, the Medici family portrait. Second we have, this is a good one. This is La Primavera, okay? And this is a subtle mixture of mythological, Greek, and biblical themes, right? What we see here is the changing of seasons from winter to spring is what we're seeing. So we start with the right side of the painting. We have this blue figure here who looks like he is about to pass out. He's very tired. He's trying to pull back this forest nymph here, and who's hanging on to this lady here. Well, this is winter. And winter is trying to last longer, but can't because it's spring now. Trying to pull the helper, and then this is spring We call her maybe, the spirit of spring, coming in, throwing flowers left and right, all that stuff. And you can't stop time. Time is going to come, and spring is going to come, and winter's just going to have to go to bed and sleep it off, right? Now, we have in the middle another mythological figure of Mother Nature, standing in the middle, blessing everything that's going on. Look at the bountiful fruit in the trees, and then we have all this mythological stuff. We have the three ladies here, and the ladies are dancing in a circle, and they are the fates, right? They represent time. It's time as in, who determines how long you live. And if you remember the Greek mythology, we have the one who holds the string, the one who weaves the string, the one who cuts the string at the end of your life. And that's what these represent. And then we have this gentleman here. This is probably a Greek god, maybe even Lorenzo de Medici, right, as a young man. And he's picking fruit off the tree. These are oranges. Now, significantly, with the de Medici, orange was kind of their symbol. In their coat of arms, they had an orange. And so this was kind of a symbol of their family as well. Now, okay, so we talked about mythological themes. What about the Christian themes? Well, subtle. Look above Mother Nature's head. We have an angel, and this little angel has wings. Now, this could be Cupid. He has arrows, and he's shooting, right? But it is also a symbol, a Christian symbol of an angel. Now, look again at Mother Nature. We have seen that figure before in medieval art. It looks very similar to the Virgin Mary, right? And the Virgin Mary has her hand up as if she is blessing those in a Christian way. If you look behind her, these look like arches in a cathedral, right? And so we have a mixture of Christian and mythological themes here. Mother Nature, Virgin Mary, maybe, right? This thing would be hanging probably somewhere in the Medici Palace, and they would just admire it. Like the family portrait would be hanging in the Medici Palace. And so you would go into the palace and see the beautiful art that was there. Today, if you go to Florence, it's in the Uffizi Gallery, and you have to go to the Uffizi Gallery. It's got all these great paintings in it, if you ever go to Florence. Go. All right. Da Vinci, and again, we all know Leonardo da Vinci, the second turtle, right? So Da Vinci was the Renaissance man. He was an artist, but if you ask him, he would say, no, I'm not an artist, I'm a doctor, I'm a scientist, I'm an inventor, I'm a warrior, I do all these things. And he did. Here's a sketchbook, and I think you can get like the hardback at a bookstore somewhere. And it has all of his drawings that they've discovered in it. And he draws cats, he draws old people, he draws dead bodies, he draws everything. And he does it as a study, as a scientific study. This one is the most interesting because it is called Vitruvian Man, and it is the symbol of the Renaissance. Think back to humanism, the idea that humans have been elevated to a position in God's world where they can take pride in themselves and look out and discover their world. Now, look at this. We have Vitruvian Man here, right? And Vitruvian Man has like circle and square, and at first you think, oh, it's a scientific study of the movement of the human body. You have the arms moving, and the legs moving, and the feet are shaped different ways, and so maybe that's it. And that probably is part of it, but there's a symbolic meaning to this as well. Archimedes was a Roman inventor and mathematician that was very popular, Eureka, I found it, and all that stuff. Archimedes had a shape that he felt was the most perfect shape in the world, and that was the square inside the circle. In fact, the legend says that after he died, instead of having his name on his tombstone, he had this shape on his tombstone, the circle and the square connected, right? Well, here's what Da Vinci does. He knows about Archimedes. So he draws the Archimedes shape, and inside the shape, he draws the human figure. What is he saying? The circle and the square are the perfect shape. Man is the perfect shape, the ultimate creation of God, right? And so humanism in art is what we see here. And that is the symbolism of the Renaissance, right? Man has become the center of the universe. Man, humans, are going to figure out and discover so many things, and we're not going to be told that we're sinful and we don't need to study ourselves or our world around us, right? So this is why Vitruvian Man is a significant artwork. Now, one last thing. If you look at the PowerPoint and look at the writing on the top, of course, it's scribbly and old. But if you notice, it starts on the right and goes to the left. And that means that he could write backwards. Some people can do that. If you know someone who can just put a pen or a pencil on a piece of paper and just write this way. Of course, other cultures like the Arabic cultures, they write this way anyway. But he wrote in Italian just this way. He could write this way or this way, just naturally. And if you want to read it, what do? You hold it up to a mirror, and it's code. Right? It's this special little code. All right, the most famous painting ever painted, the Mona Lisa. Right? Again, you stand in like a truck stop and talk to everybody that comes in and say, you know the Mona Lisa? They're going to say, oh, I know the Mona Lisa, right? So, art historians and, street sweepers know the Mona Lisa. They know what that is. Now, if you've ever seen the Mona Lisa in a real live person at the Louvre in Paris, you will probably think, what is the big deal? Because the Mona Lisa is actually probably about, I'm not kidding you, about that big. It is very small. Every single copy that you see of the Mona Lisa is bigger than the Mona Lisa, right? And so it is anticlimactic. I'm warning you ahead of time if you haven't seen it. It's anticlimactic. It's behind a rope that's like 15 feet away from the painting. The painting's under glass, and it's sitting right there. It is the most famous painting ever painted, and people walk away from it going, why? Well, there are a number of reasons that we don't have time to get into today. But here's a reason I will tell you. And again, you probably noticed this by looking at posters of the Mona Lisa. What is she thinking? What is going on? Look, is that a smirk? Is that a smile? Why are her eyes following me? What's going on? What's going on in her head? That's what it makes us think about. Now, if you study art history, and I highly recommend that you do, you will study an artist named Rembrandt. And Rembrandt was excellent at what we call the psychological portrait. The portrait that's not just a straight face that's like, I'm a guy and this is my face. It's, I'm thinking about something, or I'm pondering something, or something's on my mind. And you're wondering, what is it? What are they thinking about? And very subtly, Da Vinci has put this, right, in the painting. What is she thinking about? What's on her mind? What is she looking at? That type of thing, right? Now, here's what we know about the Mona Lisa. It was painted for a merchant, a wealthy merchant. He never purchased it for some reason. Da Vinci kept it with him his entire life and worked on it up until a week before he died. He had it in his possession when he died, and eventually it went to a museum, right? And so we really don't know what his motivation for this, but what I can tell you is it is one of the first examples that we see of a psychological portrait. So take it easy on the Mona Lisa, all right? It is the most famous painting ever painted. Now, another great work of Da Vinci was The Last Supper, but here's the problem with Da Vinci. Da Vinci was so brilliant that he never could finish anything because his mind was constantly working. He was always, I got to start this, I got to start that. There are a number of paintings and sculptures and drawings that he did of things that he was going to complete and he never did. Well, The Last Supper was completed. It's in Milan. It's not in Rome. It's not in Florence either. It's in Milan, and it's in a convent. It's actually in a cafeteria. It's above the dining hall, right? And it's the Last Supper, the disciples eating. How appropriate is that? But the idea of fresco, which we can't get into, is the way that Italian artists painted on walls, and it involved wet plaster and paint together, and you let the paint into the wet plaster and you let it dry, and it stays forever. It's very solid, right? But you have to paint on a certain timetable. You can't paint all at once because you got to put the wet plaster on there, paint on that wet plaster, let it dry, put some more wet plaster on there, paint on that, and let it dry. It's a slow process, and Da Vinci was a mover and a shaker. He didn't want a slow process. So he created a new style of painting where he didn't have to do that, and he painted it on this wall, one of the greatest paintings ever painted. However, not all scientists get it right 100% of the time, and that was Da Vinci in this case as well. The process that he created began to flake and peel even before the painting was finished. It has been flaking and peeling ever since, right? Eventually, sadly, we'll probably lose it. Restorers got in there and tried to redo it and save it and preserve it. And if you go to Milan today to try to see it, you can't get in the room. It's all dark, and they have a life-size on the wall outside the room so you can look at it, but they won't even let you in because it's slowly fading away, and eventually it probably will. But the scene, of course, is the Last Supper. We have Jesus and the disciples. The moment is when Jesus tells his disciples that someone will betray me. Judas is looking a little guilty over here, and he's about to leave, and all the disciples are agitated, like, is it me, is it me? But as far as Renaissance art goes, what we see is perspective, right? Look up here on the ceiling, and look how the ceiling moves back into space at an angle, and eventually the vanishing point will be here, right behind the head of Christ. And so we have all this perspective to show that, right? Now there's Da Vinci Code stuff, I ain't even getting to that, okay? Ask me about it later, I'll tell you. So this is a great Da Vinci painting. Sadly, it'll probably fade away to nothing. All right, now we get to Michelangelo. Now, okay, so Da Vinci was a great artist. But again, he didn't paint a lot of things because he was too busy thinking up stuff, drawing stuff, and things like that. So we don't have a lot of artwork of Da Vinci, which makes it very valuable. Michelangelo was extremely prolific, and he lived a long time. He lived up into his 60s, 70s, old man, right? That's what we're talking about. And so he would create so much art that when we talk about an artist of the Renaissance, we talk about Michelangelo. Michelangelo is the man, right? And so one of the most famous sculptures that he did, we already seen in one of the slides, is David by Michelangelo, right? And so we have the S-curve, the contrapposto, yes? But what we see in great sculptors of the period who worked in marble is that they have the ability to take stone and make stone look like skin, make stone look like hair, make stone look like leather and watery eyes. They have the ability to do all of that, right? And that was Michelangelo. Michelangelo had that ability to create lifelike sculptures that look like they could just walk off the podium and walk down the street, yes? And so David was that sculptor. Now, with Donatello's David, we have a moment in the story where he's killed Goliath and he's cut off his head. This is a different moment in the story. This is before the fight, where David has gone to, if you're familiar, he's gone to the stream and he's picked up the 5 smooth stones and he's about to go and fight Goliath. And so we have a very pensive face, yes, a very serious face, a game face. Goliath's saying, I'm going to do this now. And so we see that in the face and the eyes. But take a look at the hair. Look how good that is, yes? And the eyes and how the brow is wrinkled. And then look at the hand. Look at the veins in the hand. That's all stone. That's crazy how good that is. Michelangelo was head and shoulders above anybody that ever lived in his time period as a sculptor. And he knew it too, and that was the problem with Michelangelo. Michelangelo was one of the first artists who was very difficult to live with. He knew he was talented, and he let everybody know he was talented, right? He didn't have a lot of friends. Okay, so that was in Florence. He did that for the de Medicis, David, right? And then he goes to Rome and starts to work for the Pope. And his introduction artwork for the Pope was the Pietà. Now, the Pietà is a term meaning art that shows Mary with the dead body of Christ. So it could be a painting, it could be a sculpture, but it's just the Pietà. But the most famous Pietà is Michelangelo's Pietà. So when somebody says Pietà, think Michelangelo, right? This is in the Vatican. If you've ever been to the Vatican, it's there. You'll see it, right? And we have the dead body of Christ here, and we have the Virgin Mary cradling the dead body of Christ as he has just been taken down from the cross, all right? So let's take a close-up of this. Now, first of all, we have the face of Mary. There's some things here that aren't quite right, okay? Look at Mary's face. It's beautiful, right? It's got this great, soft glow to it. It's got the head, the scarf that has all the wrinkles that look like you could just shake it and it would straighten out. How old is Mary when Jesus died? I mean, Jesus is 33 when he died. Mary's got to be up there, 50s at least, right? Look at that face. How old is that? That's maybe a 15, 16-year-old girl right there, right? Michelangelo doesn't care. He wants to show Mary at the manger holding the dead body of Christ. Yes? Now, Christ's face, also beautiful, but definitely Renaissance. Look at this little groomed beard right there. He's got the little goatee going on. He's just come off like, the street in Florence and has walked in and then, posed for this picture. And so we have the Renaissance beautiful face of Christ. Now, another thing to talk about. I need to go back. Let me go back to... I can't go back. Come on now. There we go. I'm going back. Hold on. All right. Look, Mary is cradling the body of Christ. He's a 33-year-old man. He's an adult. If Mary stood up, she'd be 8 feet tall. She's huge, right? She's cradling him like a child. And that's another thing that Michelangelo wouldn't care about. He's like, so, I wanted to paint it. I want to sculpt this way, so I do. Now, here's the last thing. Notice that she has a sash across her chest, right? This little rope thing. And that was something that, he painted, he got in there. But he was new to Rome. He creates this. He puts it up, people to see. And people didn't know him very well. And so they began to wonder who did it. And they began to name other sculptors who maybe this guy did it or that guy did it. This infuriated Michelangelo. So Michelangelo, what he did was he jumped over the rope. There was no rope. He got to the statue, right? And he took his chisel and his hammer and he carved his name on that sash. Michelangelo Buonarroti. So everybody knew that he's the one who did this. He carves his name on the Virgin's chest. Probably didn't make the Pope very happy, but he's like, made by Michelangelo Buonarroti. That's Michelangelo, right? Okay, so this is one of his greatest works. So the Pope does hire him to do his tomb. You can do my tomb, create these sculptures, so he gets started on it. And in the middle of that, the Pope stops him and says, well, no, I need you to stop that. I need you to paint. And Michelangelo says, I'm not a painter. I'm a sculptor. Let me sculpt things. No, you also paint. Now you get to paint this. This is the Sistine Chapel. And what the Pope wanted him to do was paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. So everything we're looking at here was created by Michelangelo. All the top and eventually the back wall as well is Michelangelo. Now what this is the story of Genesis, the creation of the world, Adam and Eve in the garden, Adam and Eve out of the garden, all the way to the flood, right? And it's what we see on the ceiling. And then on the back wall, which he did a little later in life, is the Last Judgment, where everybody goes to heaven or hell. Okay, so let's take some close-ups of this. All right, some of the more famous panels. The most famous one is here on the bottom. This is the creation of Adam, where God is there. God is floating over and touching Adam's finger, the lifeless body of Adam, and he's waking up, and boom, there he is. He's very, very awake and alive at the time. And so life begins, yes? And then we have the expulsion of the garden, and we have the whole story here. Here's Adam and Eve. They're eating fruit, and eventually they're caught by God, and they're kicked out of the garden. We see that over there as well. And so this is all the big panels that are on the ceiling as you walk down the chapel, right? One of the things about Michelangelo, this is one of the things his critics would hit him on, the great sculptor. We see this in his sculpture. But everybody he painted or sculpted was huge. It's like they're on steroids. They were big. They had big muscles and bulging biceps and everything. Da Vinci used to make fun of him and says that his bodies looked like sacks of potatoes because look how potatoes roll around them because they're all muscular. And even the women look like men with like boobs taped to their chest. They're strong. And there could be reasons for that. I mean, you weren't allowed to have male models, and so you probably just had a female model. So you probably had a male model, and you just drew boobs. And okay, there's a guy, there's a woman. Not very feminine. His statues and his paintings of women aren't very feminine, right? So if there is a chink in Michelangelo's armor, it might be that. Okay, so here we have the flood. This is toward the last panel of the wall there, where we have this weird-looking boat that looks like a house. That's the ark, right? And then all the people are dying. They're swimming to the last vestiges of land on earth and about to cover them up and die. And you kind of feel sorry for them, even though they're sinners and everything. Trying to get on the boat, they can't get on the boat. And so there is the death of the world and the survival of Noah's family. And later on, he would be invited back. He finished the ceiling, and it was this huge event. Everybody came, and he became like famous because of the ceiling itself, even not for the statues. And then he came back years later, and he did the Last Judgment, which has God in the middle there. And then the people on the right are going to, the people on the left are going to hell, and the people on the right are going to heaven. And that's, of course, the end of time. Yes? Okay. Now, the last statue we look at with Michelangelo is Moses. This was supposed to be for the Pope's tomb, Pope Leo. He never finished the tomb. It was supposed to be this huge structure in the middle of the Vatican, and it never got done. But he did finish Moses. He loved Moses. This is probably his favorite statue, right? Because he thought she's so real. And the legend is that when he finished it, he took the hammer and smacked Moses on the knee and said, "Speak!" And, Moses didn't speak. But it looked so real that it could have, right? So let's look at some close-ups of this. We have the face here, the piercing eyes, right? This is the moment in the story where he's just gotten the 10 Commandments that are under his arm. He's coming down from Sinai, and he's talking to the people who aren't being good. You have to look that one up. And so above his head, we have this mystery here. It's a mystery that a lot of people have tried to solve. We think we know what it means. It looks like he has 2 horns sticking out of his head. Okay, so that's weird. Moses didn't have horns. Okay, but there are a couple of reasons for this. First of all, we think that he might be trying to show the light, because the Bible says that when he came down from Sinai, he had been in the presence of God, and his face shone so brightly that you couldn't look directly at him. He was just flashlight hit. And so those might represent rays of light, from God coming off the top of his head. Also in the Hebrew, or in the Greek, the word for horns is very similar to the word for light. And so Michelangelo might have read it and misrepresented the word as horns and actually put 2 horns on Moses' head, because that's what the Bible said. He's trying to be accurate, right? Either way, it looks a little weird, but it's probably just light emanating from his head. Also, this torso here, take a look again at this huge muscular arm. Moses was jacked, right? According to Michelangelo, he was a big guy. And so that's the way Michelangelo did his art. Okay, so Michelangelo, probably the quintessential Renaissance artist, one that we say the all-star of Renaissance art, right? So last one, unless it's been long, but you have to deal with it because I like art. Raphael Sanzio, ladies, feast your eyes. This is the rock star of the Renaissance. He was very handsome, and he had lots of girls, never married, lots of love affairs and liaisons, and just a sweet guy and very handsome. No pockmarks. That's what it means in Renaissance. No pockmarks. He had clear skin, right? So, here's another thing that appealed to the ladies. His forte was painting the Virgin Mary and the baby Jesus, or we call Madonna and Child paintings. Madonna and Child, right? And here's the difference. In the Middle Ages, if you saw Madonna and Child, you would see this lady, very stiff, sitting there blessing people with a baby holding like a parrot on her arm, and the baby would be like little Danny DeVito, and he would also be blessing people like this. You know, not very natural at all, not the way a mother and a baby would react. And what Raphael did, Raphael made it real. He painted real mothers, real children, and he called them the Virgin Mary and the baby Jesus, or Madonna and Child. A couple of examples here. The Cowper Madonna is here. You have this beautiful face of the woman here and the baby. Obviously, they're related. Look at the face. And the baby is, of course, holding the mother and is very close, very sensitive, very special. This one is my favorite, the Madonna in chair, because they had to name it other things because he had like a bunch of paintings of Madonna and Jesus, and so he had to name it different things. And she's sitting in a chair. So this is Madonna in chair, and we have this beautiful scene of the mother and the very healthy fat baby sitting in the lap of the mother, and they're like, pressing their faces against each other, very close, very sweet. If you see a third child in here, that's always going to be John the Baptist, right? So you got Mary, and Jesus, and the slightly older child is John the Baptist, and then we have that in this painting as well. And so he made a reputation and a living off of doing the Madonna and Child paintings. He's a very talented painter and a very popular, with the people, kind of a rock star, as we said. And he was recognized by the Pope and given a commission in the Vatican. So at the same time, the Sistine Chapel is being painted by Michelangelo. Raphael is painting this, which is the School of Athens. Okay, and here's what you have to imagine, going back to the idea of education, right? The School of Athens is what humanists believed heaven would be like. When you got to heaven, you didn't get to, wear a halo and get wings and play a harp. You got to learn, right? Because what would be heaven without learning? You have to go and you have to learn. I know that's probably not the vision of heaven to a lot of you guys, but imagine the Renaissance, right, where you learn for the sake of learning, and you get to heaven, and all the great teachers and all the great scholars and all the great philosophers that have ever lived are there, and they are teaching, right? And you get to just sit and listen to them, and it's amazing. It's the greatest thing ever. And this is that vision, the vision of heaven of the Renaissance, with all the great teachers sitting and teaching you. Big ones in the middle, right? In the center of the painting, we have Aristotle and we have Plato walking through the University of Heaven. The mascot are the angels, and they are talking about their theories of forms and the theories of earth, and they're arguing, debating. We have Euclid in here. We have Alexander the Great is in here. We have Socrates, of course. We have all these great philosophers and teachers and mathematicians and scientists, Archimedes, and they're all there talking and debating and with each other, and we're just there soaking in the knowledge. How wonderful that is, right? And as we said, Renaissance painters many times painted them in the scene, and so did Raphael. There he is right there, walking through, looking at us, going, hey, this is pretty cool. How you doing, right? And so, and again, there are lots of symbolism to this painting, but this was painted in the Vatican libraries, right next door to the Sistine Chapel. Now, Michelangelo and Raphael hated each other. Michelangelo was a terrible guy, and he never liked anybody and was always jealous and paranoid and everything. Raphael was a nice guy and very popular, which really made Michelangelo angry with him. And so having them next to each other is the way the Pope got them motivated to work, right? That's what he did. And so one of the things that Raphael did in the painting that was kind of funny was he put Michelangelo down here all by himself, right? So he's the kid in the lunchroom that doesn't have any friends, so he has to sit by himself. Now, he's supposed to be some famous philosopher, but it's the likeness. You look at it and go, oh, that's Michelangelo, right? And so he's all alone, no friends. And also, if you look at it, look at the PowerPoint, he's much larger than anybody else in the painting. He's huge. And this is a way that Raphael's making fun of the way he paints. He paints everything so big. So now Michelangelo has all these muscles, and he's so big. And he probably was a pretty muscular guy. He can't be a sculptor of marble and not have big hands and big arms, right? But, there he is, kind of a funny thing. Of course, Michelangelo hated it, thought it was stupid, right? So, anyway, two great artists working in the rooms next to each other, creating masterpieces that we still got today. You never get that in the art world anymore. All right, so Raphael dies, sadly enough, in his 30s, very young. He gets a fever and dies like 24 hours after that. Great loss. Even Michelangelo wrote nice things about him in his death. And he's buried in the Pantheon, right, which is the old Roman temple, converted to a Roman Catholic church. Go to the Pantheon, and you can see his tomb. There's his tomb. Appropriately, you have a statue of the Virgin Mary and the baby Jesus, and he is buried here, right? So that's where his body is. Okay, so this was the art of the Renaissance. And this is where we'll pick up next year the idea of how the Renaissance have influenced Europe and have influenced eventually trade and commerce in the Age of Exploration, and that's where we'll start. So this is it, 55 minutes. Sorry about that. Didn't mean for it to be so long. Break it up. You got a while to look at this, so take a breath, drink some water, get a cookie, and break it up. It's good. It's good stuff. All right, so if you have any questions, let me know, and I will see you guys soon.